This is a reading of Sea Monster, Imprisoned by Madness, by Mark Stephen Nordlund. Copyright 2025. Mark Stephen Nordlund. All rights reserved. A Boohouse Books book. Boohousebooks.com. It was a bleak and solemn afternoon on Brighton Beach. Charcoal clouds and a stiff breeze made South Brooklyn feel like late November in early June. A million footprints and cigarette butts haunted the sand like ghosts of a sunnier and more agreeable day. The gray ocean was still, and condos lined the coast with dingy brick and vacant black windows. Today, Brighton Beach made little effort to live up to its own radiant and optimistic name. Despite the forlornness, one man limped along the tide. His dirty white t-shirt and cargo shorts did little to fight the cold, but his somber expression conveyed indifference to the weather. Ormy Green was in his early 40s. He held a brand-new metal detector in his oversized fist. He was a tall man, with hulking shoulders and a blunt, hairless head. The silent giant carried a long tote bag over his arm and searched the beach with small, shifting eyes. Over thousands of walks, his feet had developed a thick callus from corrosive seawater and the occasional slice and puncture of shells and stones. He made a mile-wide zigzag from the New York Aquarium to Little Stone Pier. He moved slowly from the tide to the boardwalk until the path was completed, or until the beach closed. Every few yards he felt a sharp sting in his heel as he bent and snatched an aluminum can or foam scrap from the sand and placed it into his bag, ridding the beach of litter. The sting had always been present, but he did very little to resolve it. To Ormy, the pain was worth the effort. He hated litter, especially on the beach. The millions of tons of trash that found its way to the oceans every year perfectly portrayed humanity's cruelty, apathy, and true integrity. Every once in a while, the digital hum of his detector would peak, and so would the chance of discovering a new treasure. The tote was for trash, and his many cargo pockets were for keepable finds. With treasures becoming more scarce, his standards had fallen to a radical low. Nowadays, Ormy found it difficult to decide what to keep and what to discard in order to preserve his treasure-to-trash ratio. Far ahead, and moving in his direction, a couple happily made their way up the beach. Ormy eyed them for a short second, then dropped his eyes to the sand. They were obviously tourists. When one lives in a large city like New York for most of their life, country mice are easy to spot. Their eyes constantly look up to the skyscrapers or out towards the ocean. Their expressions often convey excitement and wonder. City mice are disinterested, unamused, and keep their eyes down, numb to the miracles and architectural feats surrounding them. Ormy became nervous as the couple approached. They would be only 20 feet from him when they passed, and a local on the beach holding a metal detector was a prime target for light conversation, as was a Great Lakes fisherman holding a 15-foot pole with his line in the water. Ormy cringed as the man raised his arm and greeted him. "Finding anything good today?" he shouted. Ormy kept his head down as he moved. The stress of human interaction, especially with strangers, was almost unbearable. He found social situations extremely difficult to tolerate. All he really had to do to make the passers move on was wave back or possibly smile. The giant lacked the cognitive intelligence or experience to be aware of such an option. Ormy seldom had to deal with others until just recently. The couple halted, and the man spoke again. "I said, are you finding anything good today?" Ormy's feet stopped moving as well. He lifted his head and met eyes with the interrogator. The tourist chuckled and made an inaudible comment to his companion. Most likely something rude or insulting. Giving in to the man's crass persistence, Ormy reached into one of his pockets and pulled out a corroded iron rivet, a remnant from bridge construction he had dug up earlier that morning. The man jogged across the beach as Ormy presented it between two fingers. "Nice," he praised. "You found that today?" Ormy nodded. "I always wondered what kind of junk washes up on the beach, but I've never gone detecting myself. What's the best thing you've ever found here?" he asked. Silence. "Or anywhere," the man generalized. Ormy just wanted the man to go away. He turned his eyes to the beach and searched the sands and his thoughts. Looking back at the man, he shrugged. Perhaps that would be enough of an answer to convey reclusion and a strong disinterest in the present intercourse. The tourist caught on to the hint and quickly wrapped up the meeting. "Well, you keep at it, big guy. Hopefully, one day you can find something you can take to the bank." He slapped Ormy on the shoulder and ran back to his wife or girlfriend. The man made another muffled comment that sent them both into laughter as they continued down the coast. Another insulting jab. Ormy dropped his chin and hastily moved along his path. The sun was sinking, and the hour was aging as Ormy's detector bit something under the sand. Its digital moan deepened and choked. He waved the coil over the spot to find the precise location of the item and began to dig. His large hand scooped like a plastic bucket as he sifted through the sediment. The glint of white metal reflected the remaining daylight as Ormy plucked a piece of jewelry from a handful of sand. He smiled as the thick high school ring was dusted off and picked clean. The hollow center stone was fractured, but the feature that made Ormy tremble with delight was an engraving of a barracuda in the item's side. The aquatic creature was most likely a school mascot, or displayed the owner's love of fishing. Either way, Ormy had found a treasure on the beach that represented his love of the ocean, and that made it all the more valuable. Ormy pushed the find deep into his pocket as his watch buzzed. He silenced the alarm and looked toward the beach patrol shack. His shoulders sank as he noticed a parked Ford pickup. The guard shack lights were illuminated, and the door was cracked open. Brighton Beach security wasn't managed or appointed by the state, nor the city of New York. It was run by a charity and staffed by volunteers. This meant that on some weeknights, the beach would be free of guards and patrols all evening, leaving Ormy free to continue searching after the beach had closed. As of 20 seconds ago, Brighton Beach was no longer open to the public, and bodies were on guard to enforce the restriction. His search was over, at least for the day. Ormy dragged his feet to the nearest set of refuse receptacles and pulled the sack from his shoulder. One by one, he retrieved dented cans, plastic cutlery, paper bags, and water bottles, tossing them into the corresponding bins for proper processing. He felt the pockets of his cargo shorts for any trinkets he had decided to keep, and reconsidered them. He discarded 4 bottle caps, a fishing weight, and a pair of tweezers. Furthering his search, he found a cylindrical bulge in his back pocket. He pulled an orange prescription bottle from his shorts and looked it over. One single pill rattled inside, and Ormy couldn't remember when he had found it or why he hadn't placed it in the tote with the other litter. The name on the pills was long and unpronounceable. Aware of the dangers that came with taking unprescribed medications, Ormy dropped the bottle into the receptacle for plastic refuse. In the dark parking lot, he threw open the passenger door of his white Geo Metro and tossed his equipment onto the broken leather seat. He climbed behind the steering wheel, fastened his seatbelt, and finally started the engine on his 4th attempt. The barely operable vehicle pulled out of the empty lot. Its one working tail light, dented bumper and handicap plates disappeared down Coney Island Avenue and north towards the center of Brooklyn. On the 6th story of an amiable Williamsburg condominium, Ormy unlocked his door and arrived home. He smiled as he beheld his new residence. The quiet and comfort of finally having a place of his own was gratifying. He swore that his loft became more luxurious and extravagant every time he arrived. Saltwater fish tanks lined the walls with treasures, trinkets, and oddly shaped stones decorating the home's interior. 15-foot windows, a cathedral ceiling, a California King mattress, and a 35-inch TV filled the space with illustriousness and personal character. Locking the door firmly behind him, he approached a dresser topped with his smallest and more delicate finds. He added the class ring and the rivet to the display, adjusting their positions and facings for the most copacetic presentation possible. Ormy removed his sandy flip-flops and checked his mailbox. Delighted, he found a letter from his brother, enclosed with an American Express Platinum card. He quickly unfolded the note and read the handwritten words. Ormy, I hope this letter finds you well. As you get settled into your new place, I thought I'd lend another helping hand until you fully get onto your feet. I've sent you an expenses card to help with food, clothing, and anything else you may need. Don't worry, you won't have to pay me back for its use. I'm always here to help you. As for the car, I'll do what I can to find you something dependable. I'm proud of you, brother. You're finally out and on your own, tackling the world, finding yourself. It took you 20 years to do it, but the point is, you did it. Mom would have kept you prisoner in that house forever, and I'm glad that didn't happen. I'll take care of her for now. You need to focus on yourself. It's best that you keep your distance from Mom for now anyway. She wasn't exactly in the best of spirits after you left. As matters progress, I will keep you posted. Love, Hayden. Ormy returned the letter to the envelope as glee shined in his small eyes upon receiving the credit card. Throughout the years, Hayden was often far away, but remained close through letters and an intimate, brotherly bond. He pulled his wallet from his pocket and added the card to his driver's license, Pets Pro member card, and large collection of saltwater enthusiast coupons. That night, Ormy laid in bed. 2 weeks now, without sleep. He hadn't slept since the move, and slumber was his happiest time. Despite his mother's constant nagging, abuse, and torment, her singing throughout the night always helped him sleep. It seemed ironic now. He had pined for independent freedom his entire life. Upon gaining it, he had traded captivity for insomnia. The only sound that echoed against the tall walls was the growl of the aquarium pump motors, and the TV was too obnoxious and distracting to gain him any rest. He stared at the shadows of fish as they slipped across the dull light. Ormy sighed. If only he could be a fish and swim as he pleased and slept as he pleased, without the awareness of captivity. Shadow after shadow drifted across the walls with jerking fins and wading tails. Cardinal fish, royal grammas, and angelfish made graceful shadow puppets as he watched the entrancing show. Suddenly, the outline of a woman joined their dance. Her arms were drawn back, and her hair flowed behind her majestically. A long, fish-like tail propelled her quickly past the projection of light. All at once, her shadow vanished from the wall. Ormy sat up and snapped his gaze to the tanks. He sharply examined the aquariums. Only fish populated the luminous enclosures. He dropped his head to his pillow. Ormy couldn't help but ponder the anomaly, as night hours gave birth to morning light. Days later, Brighton Beach was sunny, but the shivering chill continued to nip at the air. Doing his best to avoid contact with rude tourists, Ormy made his path tight to the tide and lapping water. Foam brushed against his toes as he moved his coil along the beach, listening intensely, and focus sharpened. He checked his watch. 4 hours and 19 minutes until closing. He lifted his sights to the guard shack. No truck, door closed, and no sign of life. Ormy didn't allow optimism to make him any promises. On some evenings, the guards would arrive as late as 5 minutes to close. He kept along his route, zigging and zagging. The first hour turned up nothing but litter. Typical for a start. Treasures were seldom found so close to the tide. Although upon his second hour, luck seemed to smile. 4 vintage bottle caps, a silver bracelet with an anchor pendant, and another class ring. This time, the ring's center stone was solid amethyst, Ormy's birthstone. Astonishingly, the engraved graduation year matched his own. He beamed. The chances of coming across such a coincidental find was staggeringly monumental. Ormy trembled with delectation as he pocketed the ring and moved on, his steps eager and anxious. On his third zag and 6th guard shack pass, Ormy heard an eruption of seawater followed by a shrieking wail. A cold mist brushed against his bare arm and face. Jerking his attention to the lazy waves, he noticed the wake of a disturbance in the water, about 20 yards out. He rested the coil on the sand and watched the surface return to normal. Intrigued, he continued to watch the water. A seagull cried out in the distant cold as his eyes darted, nothing for almost a minute. Ormy flipped through his mental checklist of native North Atlantic sea life. Harbor seals were more present during the winter, and humpback whales wouldn't be this close to the coast. He had been in the presence of both at specific times of the year, but none of them were known to make sounds like the one he had heard. He turned to search for any other witnesses. Presently, Ormy was the only soul on the beach. He gave the water a final glance, lifted his coil, and resumed his pattern. Almost immediately, his finding device clicked with an electronic growl. Ormy pinpointed the source, dropped to his knees and dug. His hands shook and his heart raced. Seized with an even balance of remarkable awe and confused amazement, the silent giant pulled a gleaming yellow coin from the sand. His panicked fingers wiped the trinket clean as he clumsily got to his feet. He cringed with pain upon putting pressure on his heel, but ignored the discomfort out of excitement. The 15th century piece was stamped with the image of a ship upon a cross-cut crest. An Old English inscription circled the relief, surrounded by an elegantly detailed rim. Tempted to bite the coin to confirm its authenticity, Ormy withdrew from doing so. He'd only seen that method of appraisal done in films. He did not dare take the chance of damaging something so precious. He smiled widely as a single, audible choke clicked from the back of his throat. Never in his 30 years of hunting had he turned up a find so inestimable. He snapped his head and searched up and down Brighton. No tourists, no locals, no guards. An hour and 22 minutes until closing and a lot more path to cover. Not wasting a second, Ormy sped as quickly as he could limp along the beach. He efficiently waved his coil from left to right, listening for that delicious electrical moan as his feverish elation tingled. He felt like a midnight slots player surfing along an isolated winning streak in an empty casino. An hour passed. Still nothing. Ormy stayed vigilant with his remaining time. On his 11th patrol shack pass, and 6 minutes until closing, the roar of a motor entered the beach. Ormy halted. Expecting to see the Ford pickup filled with volunteers, he was surprised as he watched a substantially sized recreational vehicle pull through the guard entrance. A strange symbol was painted across the vehicle's side, like a large, violent letter X over searing flames. The RV carefully puttered along the beach and came to a stop near Little Stone Pier. Much like the discovery of the coin and his current, incredible luck, activity such as this on Brighton Beach was also unusual. After a long minute, the RV's brake lights vanished and the engine silenced. Ormy watched curiously as a group of suspiciously dressed individuals deboarded and gathered together. The sun had just set, and visibility was below adequate. The strangers were dressed in black shrouds and came in a variety of odd heights and weights. Some were as tall as basketball players, and some were as small as children. In the darkness, Ormy could not see what they were up to. Fear began to slowly grip his throat, and a heavy weight pained his chest as he watched the cult busy themselves. They moved back and forth from the RV to a spot they had chosen near the pier. He swallowed hard in his throat and felt an uncomfortable chill. Abruptly, his wristwatch alarmed. Panicked, Ormy silenced the buzz, then focused intimately on the group. His disturbance hadn't seemed to distract or draw attention. He turned to the guard shack. No truck and no light. No security tonight. Ormy was now stuck at a crossroads. Should he walk away from a hot streak with his winnings, or press on and risk being seen by the sinister group? Resolute to proceed, he quickly chose the latter. He could still complete his final zigs and zags while avoiding them, but he would have to come uncomfortably close. With his head down and his steps swift, Ormy turned the volume down on his detector and made the first pass without detection. Then another. A campfire was lit near the pier as the shady cult stood in a circle around the blaze. Loud chants and strange, otherworldly tunes resonated from the site. The sound was frightening, eerie, and bizarre. As the summoning chants grew louder, another musical piece joined in. Up the beach and near the water, a minuscule siren lullaby began. The heavenly piece seized Ormy on an emotional level and gripped directly onto his heart. In the same way a long-forgotten song on the radio could conjure joy, sadness, or remembrance, this song brought him an instant and familiar feeling of sympathy and affection. Smitten by sentiment, Ormy attempted to overcome his fear and follow the voice. Meters ahead, he found the source. He dropped his metal detector to the sand and went white with revelation. The gold coin he had found hours ago was nothing compared to the treasure he presently beheld. Reason, logic, and common sense vanished as he stood over a miniature mermaid waist-deep in the tide and crying out towards the chanting cult. Her body was the size of his hand, and her hair was long and golden. Her musical shouts danced in the air above her and brought tears to Ormy's astonished stare. She seemed deeply disturbed by the activity by the pier, and she reached out toward the group with an expression of anguishing objection. Her aquamarine tail was knotted tightly around the razor-sharp plastic of aluminum can rings, cruelly left behind by apathetic humans. Without hesitation, Ormy attempted to free her. His large fingers made it difficult to perform such an intricate task, but his determination made up for hindrance. He loosened the ring, undid the knot, and pulled the hazard from her tail, tearing one of her fins in the process. She screeched in pain and fought against his giant hands. Ormy cringed upon injuring the mermaid, and the guilt hit him like poison. Suddenly, the crack of an explosion emitted from the clan's fire. A horrible spectacle ignited Brighton Beach with a demonic energy. The hot, licking flames of their blaze took the form of monstrous tentacles and rose towards the night sky. The twisting, curling limbs writhed and flexed with a searing, hellish conflagration as Ormy watched in terror. Upon witnessing what the group had summoned, the mermaid screamed again. The pulse from her banshee cry boomed across the beach, disrupting dry sand, twigs, and trash. Ormy looked up to see the horrible group turn in his direction as the tentacles slammed into the fire and vanished. Intense panic, sadness, and remorse thundered in Ormy's chest. He came to a second crossroad. He could leave the injured beauty to the mercy of the cloaked demons, or attempt to save her. He had everything he would need to mend her at home, and Ormy trusted himself far more than he trusted them. Swiftly making a decision, he dumped his collected trash onto the beach and put the mermaid in his tote. Thick, callous feet pounding the sand, and his pain almost intolerable, Ormy ran to the parking lot. He did not dare take a second to look back, but he imagined the cult was not far behind. He got to his car, swung open the door, and leapt inside. The tires of the old metro jerked him forward and out of the lot. Not a soul could be seen in his rearview mirror as he sped down Coney Island Avenue and headed home. Ormy unlocked his tall oak door and entered with haste. He never left a light burning after vacating, but the beautiful skyline of Manhattan Island cast a magical glow through his stained glass windows. Without wasting any time, he pulled a bucket from the kitchen and siphoned water from one of his aquariums to fill it. Laying the tote onto the cashmere comforter of his bed, he opened it wide, exposing his precious rescue. She was pale white and appeared to be suffocating. She coughed and gagged as blood dripped from her injured tail. Ormy took her gently into his hands and placed her into the bucket. The mermaid took to the water like an infant taking her first breath. Unscrewing a bottle of melozyme, he dosed the bucket with 10 drops of fin regrowth and damaged tissue treatment for fish. He turned up the lights as her color returned and her activity and energy normalized. Ormy cleared off his cherrywood nightstand and placed the bucket on its treated surface. He sat on his mattress and let the events of the last several hours sink in. Happiness, amazement, wonderment, and disbelief flooded him with the fall of adrenaline. Questions upon questions came to mind. Were mermaids common? Were they always this small? What was that demonic sect doing on the beach? And what would they have done to the mermaid if they got their hands on her? He didn't bother tormenting himself with that last inquiry. What happened? Had happened, and Ormy was sure he had made the right decision. He let out a long sigh as his drum returned to a normal beat. He felt a metallic bulge in the pocket of his cargo shorts. His attention shifted. Standing quickly, Ormy pulled the coin, anchor bracelet, amethyst ring, and bottle caps from his shorts and displayed them with his other trinkets on the titanium, lighted display stand in the corner of his loft. He smiled as he watched each of his remarkable finds sparkle like diamonds in a jewelry store window. However, none of them held a candle to his treasure in the bucket. What would his brother think? Upon that thought, Ormy removed his sandals, placed them neatly by the door, and checked his mailbox. Another envelope. Eagerly he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Ormy, I hope this letter finds you well. I trust you are getting use out of the card I sent, and I've almost found you a trustworthy vehicle. Hopefully that bucket of bolts hasn't broken down on you yet. I finally found a place for Mom in Highland Park with a nice view of the water and a good reputation regarding her needs and our expectations. She always preferred lakes to New York's ugly ocean, and other residents there don't complain about the conditions. I still strongly advise you to remain distant. I'll let you know when it's safe to pay her a visit. Write me back as soon as you can. I want to know how you are doing. As matters here progress, I will keep you posted. Love, Hayden. Ormy smiled. He sharpened a pencil, sat on his bed, and excitedly drafted a response. He joyously told Hayden all about the coin he had found, the coincidental ring, and, with hesitation, the mermaid. In detail, he explained what had happened that day, how he felt about it, and what he had brought home. He figured the details matter when explaining something true that seems so unbelievable. After filling out an entire page, he folded up the letter, sealed it tight, and mailed it. Ormy had never looked so forward to a response from Hayden. He sat on his bed, clicked on a lamp above the bucket, and watched his treasure. The mermaid peeked her head above the surface. Her long, wavy hair flattened against her head and fanned out across the water as her gorgeous eyes watched him curiously. She was nude with the exception of her tail, and the magic in her stare exhibited a childlike innocence. Ormy marveled over her. He could not believe his luck. She was absolutely beautiful, and the silent giant felt a jealous admiration for the mythical creature as he watched her swim and dance. Slowly and magically she began to sing. Within his cathedral walls, her voice reverberated with an ethereal and alluring intoxication. Ormy felt his heart sing right along with her as a wave of tingling emotion cascaded over his body. Completely taken by her lullaby, his breaths deepened, and his eyelids began to close. Within a matter of minutes, Ormy succumbed to slumber, fell backward onto the bed, and fell fast asleep. It had been the first time in weeks he had gained any kind of rest. The mermaid's soothing song kept him in a dreamy state of tranquility, into the evening, through the night, and beyond. Ormy woke. He woke in the same position he had passed out in. His arms were sprawled outward and his body laid horizontally on the bed. His legs were bent and his feet touched the floor. Ormy had almost forgotten what waking up felt like. At first, he had no idea where he was or what day it was. The sun shined through the windows, and rays of light stretched across his loft and to the floor. He sat up. The mermaid peered at him from the water in the bucket. The mermaid, he thought. The events from his last visit to Brighton Beach rushed back into his sleep-fogged memory. Ormy went through every detail of the night in his head, however long ago the night had been. He stretched, yawned, and shifted his weight to his feet. The bite of pain throbbed in his foot and up his leg. A raw tenderness was beginning to form that hadn't been present in the past weeks. As usual, he ignored the affliction. A small shriek resonated from the bucket. The mermaid began splashing and flailing, making irate expressions directed at her savior. Ormy acknowledged her and examined the rusty bucket he had placed her in. He didn't blame her for objecting. His fish were swimming in luxury compared to the dingy home he had made for her. A swell of eager exhilaration filled his chest as he remembered the credit card. He grabbed his wallet, his keys, and his neatly placed footwear. Ormy flashed the mermaid a look of assurance as he opened his door and departed from the regal Brooklyn condo. The silent giant opened the driver's side door of his Metro and paused as he glanced at the back seat. It was empty. He melted with regret as the realization hit him. In the stir of the madness, and upon rushing off of Brighton Beach, he had left his metal detector by the shore. He examined all of the negative consequences that mistake would possibly incur. To his thoughts, there weren't many. The cult couldn't find where he lived upon discovering it, and security was on site before the beach opened. Any items left behind would go into their lost and found. For a second, Ormy considered purchasing a new device, then quickly decided against it. That metal detector was now his lucky metal detector, and his streak could be cursed if he simply replaced it. The best chance at getting it back would be to return to Brighton Beach now and speak with the volunteers. He cringed. More unwanted human interaction, but necessary. The white Metro crawled slowly onto the lot. Emergency vehicles, news vans, and people swarmed the coast from Steeplechase Pier to Manhattan Beach. Ormy could tell immediately that something was wrong. Had the cult harmed someone? Or possibly worse. All manner of possibilities rushed through his head. Parking in a far, empty space, he stepped out of the vehicle and beheld the commotion. A helicopter circled above, making passes over Littlestone Pier, and camera mounts atop reporter vans were extended high. Ormy closed his door and carefully approached the beach. Pushing through the crowds, he was stopped at a police barrier. What he saw sent chills down his spine and a salty lump into his throat. NYPD officers were stationed around an overturned ocean tanker. The immense ship was halfway onto the sand and extended almost a mile into the North Atlantic. 2 large gashes were left in the tanker's hull like claw marks, and parts of it had been crushed or chewed. Police were measuring a large hole in the sand like a footprint or a gouge. Immediately, Ormy remembered the disturbance he had seen in the water before finding the mermaid. Had that sighting been connected to this? He thought. Did the cult conjure something? Ormy wondered if any members of the sect had been apprehended or questioned by police. He turned his eyes to the security shack. The door was closed and no volunteers were present. He would not be going home with his lucky detector today. And for good reason. If it was safely collected and placed in the patrol shack, he could come back another day to claim it. Ormy happily left the intolerable group of reporters and onlookers. Limping across the lot, he felt a tinge of regret. He wondered if he could have helped authorities in any way. Perhaps he could have given a description of what he saw or made the police aware of the cult's presence on the beach. The thought of returning to the crowd made him sick, and the overturned tanker was a bigger issue than anything he had witnessed. Answering questions would also be difficult. When Ormy told a story, he told the whole truth. He wouldn't put himself in a position that would compromise the safety of his treasured mermaid. The hole and the ship was the city's problem. He had his own concerns to worry about. The excitement returned as Ormy realized why he had left his loft to begin with. He eagerly jumped into his car and departed from the chaos of Brighton Beach. Pets Pro Supplies was located in South Williamsburg and just off of Flushing Avenue. It sat comfortably between a dry cleaner's and an empty establishment with a wide sign displaying "For Lease" across the front windows. Ormy pulled into an empty space and killed the engine. Armed with his new credit card and Pets Pro membership, he crawled out of the metro and rushed inside. The smell of dog food and chlorine wafted against Ormy's face as he stepped into his personal heaven. The shop was large for a New York supply store, and tall racks lined the space with every kind of pet need and habitat mock-up imaginable. He made a line straight for the saltwater fish department and took his pick of an abundant selection. Every item his mermaid would need was presented before him, and he was filled with enough knowledge and experience to give her the perfect home. Ormy approached the front of the store with a cart filled with a mythical creature-friendly assortment. The familiar cashier greeted him as he arrived. "Big Fish, how's it going, my man?" he shouted. Ormy nodded with a slight grin and began unloading the cart onto a short conveyor belt. The cashier eyed the stock as he rang it up. "You get something new that you didn't get from us?" he asked. Ormy shrugged. The man took a scan gun from the register, leaned forward and scanned an oversized fishbowl in Ormy's cart. "Let me guess, it's a bulldog?" Ormy didn't respond. "I'm just teasing you, man. They say people get pets that look like themselves, so I was just speculating." The man finished adding up the total and helped Ormy reload his cart. High above the register, a television was broadcasting coverage of Brighton Beach. Ormy watched it intimately as aerial shots of the tanker and hole flashed on the screen. The cashier noticed it as well. "Can you believe that?" he commented. "I've got kids that play on that beach." He turned to Ormy. "Some people are monsters," he spat. The broadcast didn't give any information Ormy didn't already gather from his earlier visit. Only speculations were reported by the caster. Ormy took his cart, nodded to the gentleman, and headed for the exit. "Take care, Big Fish. Bring me pictures of your new dog," he called out. Ormy smiled as he lifted a friendly hand to the jesting cashier and made his way to the car. In his loft, Ormy siphoned more water from one of his tanks and filled the bowl. He didn't want to put her in an existing habitat. They were too far from his bed, and the mermaid songs helped him get to sleep. She was also more than just a fish. In Ormy's mind, she was half human, and putting her with pets seemed wrong somehow. Placing her beside his bed felt like better treatment for a guest. He filled the new enclosure halfway, rested it on the nightstand, and carefully poured the bucket into the bowl, filling it the rest of the way. The mermaid was transferred during the pour and seemed to enjoy the new home. Ormy placed a large stone at the bottom of the bowl and treated the water with a few drops of Quick Start and additional drops of Melazyme. When it came to food, all he could do was guess. He dropped 3 seaweed rods into her water and sprinkled the top with traditional fish food. She hadn't taken an interest. Perhaps she wasn't hungry. Ormy finished the project, cleaned up his items, and wiped down the nightstand. The mermaid smiled as he polished her fishbowl from top to bottom. Ormy smiled as well. Spending the rest of the day staring at his mermaid and watching her swim and sit upon the stone, Ormy grew tired. The sun had set, and the evening was deepening into the passing hours. He doused the lights, crawled under his blanket, and laid his head upon the pillow. The air in his loft remained silent. The mermaid was not singing. Ormy turned his head to see the creature's silhouette sitting quietly upon her stone. He lifted his hand and tapped on the bowl. Not a peep. Frustrated, Ormy threw off the blanket, approached his collection of stones, and returned to his bed. He gave the bowl 3 forceful taps with a sizable star-shaped rock. She jumped at the disturbance, rose from her seat, and brought her head to the surface. Her siren song began just as it had on the first night. Ormy smiled as he sank into his mattress and drifted pleasantly into dreams. Over the next several weeks, Ormy and his new guest got along swimmingly. She would sleep during the day and would sing to him each night and throughout the night. He was finally on track with a proper sleeping schedule, and living with a companion that didn't nag, abuse, or torment him at all hours of the day was freeing. His move out of Mom's and his decision to take his own life into his hands was now justified. He hadn't been sure at first, but things were all coming together now. His independence and his lucky find on Brighton Beach were steps to a happy and successful life on his own. Ormy couldn't wait to see what came next, if this was just the beginning. However, 2 problems had emerged. Hayden hadn't written back since the letter about the mermaid, and the growing time had made him worry. Typically, he would receive a letter no later than 7 days after a response. This time, 23 days had lapsed. His brother's silence was unnerving. Ormy had sent 2 more letters to follow up. Both were met with no return mail. The second problem was the mermaid's diet. She hadn't touched the flakes, nor did she eat anything else he had tried to feed her. Rods, dried seaweed, pellets, and frozen cubes all went to waste. In desperation, Ormy had also resorted to feeder fish, but was extremely hesitant due to the chance of introducing disease and bacteria into her habitat. She still hadn't eaten. The issue was causing Ormy to feel distress. If she didn't eat, she would die, unless there was some exception for fantasy mer life. He grabbed his wallet and sifted through his thick wad of coupons, desperate for an answer. Maybe there was a food he hadn't tried. Aquarium items of all sorts met his eyes as he thumbed through the stack. He saw air pump tubes, gravel, thermometers, tank decorations, and replacement light bulbs. The list was endless. But nothing that provided a solution. Evidently, he had used up all of his fish food discounts. Although one coupon in particular grabbed his interest. 20% off all books gleamed across the shiny paper. A book, Ormy thought. It was possible that a book on the subject of finicky fish could be found at Pro Pets. He once possessed books on taking care of fish, but he hadn't used them in years. He also hadn't brought them with him when he recently moved. Ormy stuffed the coupons into his wallet and headed for the pet store. Night had fallen, and Pro Pet's book selection was smaller than he had expected. Fortunately, there was one title regarding the feeding of rare, tropical fish. Ormy grabbed the book and made the long walk to the register. The cashier's eyes were glued to the TV as he approached and dropped the book onto the belt. He opened his wallet and plucked out the coupon. The man motioned to the television and turned his attention to Ormy. "What's up, big fish? Are you seeing this?" he asked. Ormy glanced at the screen and felt a stiffening numbness seize him almost immediately. An aerial view of Brighton Beach captured the hellish image of a titanic creature rising out of the North Atlantic. Its blood-red and royal blue scales reflected the light of the helicopter spotlights as it dragged its massive body onto the shore. The kaiju's mouth looked large enough to swallow a skyscraper, and its glowing red eyes seared with an abominable rage. Countless tentacles and immense gnashing teeth made the horrid spectacle a vision to behold as it roared with a terrible and otherworldly boom. The shop's windows rattled as the wave of the roar hit Flushing Avenue, reminding them of just how close they were to the event. The cashier scoffed. "I hope that monster gets what he deserves." With no time for the man's commentary, and the book no longer a priority, Ormy ran out of the store and unlocked his car. He bolted home, ran to his loft, and slammed the door behind him, locking it securely. Ormy threw on the lights, grabbed his TV remote, and illuminated the screen. It had been the first time he had used his television since the move, but he was damn glad he had decided to take it with him. Panicked, Ormy flipped through the stations to find the report. There it was. The creature looked larger and even more terrifying on his oversized flat screen. Now the broadcast showed multiple views of the demon from different angles. It roared again. 3 seconds later, the shockwave hit the stained glass of his loft and sent his heart into spasms. Ormy collapsed into a seated position onto his bed, remote in hand, staring at the screen and breathing heavily. He glanced at his mermaid. She was asleep on her stone. The disturbance hadn't woken her, and he had no reason to disturb her sleep. An hour passed, then 2 hours. The kaiju hadn't moved from its location on Brighton Beach, but it remained lively and active. Ormy thought of the cultists he had seen and the tentacles he had witnessed in their campfire. Had they conjured this thing, he thought. Questions crowded his mental track. All he could do was watch and speculate as the creature roared, flailed, growled, and continued its threatening display of catastrophic fury. He stood and sat beside the mermaid, eyes still glued on the frightening image. The evening had reached the hour when she would typically wake. But Ormy was in no mood for sleep. He stared at the demon on his screen and pondered. One would think that a man so obsessed with the ocean would revel in such a sight. Would this not be the crown jewel discovery for any thalassophile or saltwater creature obsessor? Ormy thought about that. Why wasn't he excited? He was absolutely ecstatic when he found the mermaid, but this had induced nothing but fear and anxiety. Ormy did his best to think rationally about the situation and clear his head of any emotional interference. For a brief fraction of a second, the TV flashed with the image of police interviewing a sobbing woman on the beach, then back to the creature. The sight only confused him further. His dread returned, and his heart raced again. In the corner of Ormy's eye, he detected movement. The mermaid was waking up. She sat slowly upward, rubbed her eyes, and drew her slender arms outward in a long stretch. She spotted the image on the TV and reacted. Swimming to the top of the bowl, she reached one hand toward the television and let out a screech that nearly shattered his windows. The mermaid writhed with trepidation and screamed as she seemed to be reaching for the creature. Another painful howl emitted from her, scrambling Ormy's thoughts and causing his head to pound in agony. He stood, approached his collection and lifted a large, wide sandstone. On his way to the bowl, he noticed the beast on his screen. It jerked its massive head north and roared in response. His windows shook again. Ormy examined the mermaid and then the demon. Was it looking for her? He thought. Could it hear her somehow? The kaiju used its muscular tentacles to pull itself from the ocean and began to move north towards Brooklyn. Ormy rested the sandstone on his shoulder and used a free hand to push the mermaid back into her bowl and into the water. He laid the stone flat on top of her enclosure and sealed her inside under its weight. Her screams were muffled, and all she could do was helplessly strike the inside of the fishbowl with her tiny fists. Ormy sat on the bed and watched the Leviathan leave a path of destruction through Gravesend, Homecrest, and down Ocean Parkway. The helicopters followed the beast as it traveled. Reporter commentary only described what the creature was doing and where it was. No military involvement or federal action was mentioned. Was the country going to do nothing about this? Ormy screamed inside his head. It had emerged almost 3 hours ago, and no shots were fired, nor was there any military presence whatsoever. His confusion grew as his terror escalated. Over the next 30 minutes, the kaiju rampaged through Midwood, Kensington, and finally came to a stop in Prospect Park. Without the cover of man-made structures, the creature's entire anatomy was visible. It stood on 4 long limbs like a dog, with a mane of waving tentacles around its head. Its eyes cast red and blue light onto the grass, trees, and surrounding neighborhoods. The beast's howl sounded like a raid siren. It just stood in place, staring north with a terrible expression of determination and outrage. Ormy ran to his windows. He couldn't see the creature, but the helicopters surrounding it from above were as clear as daylight. All night, Ormy stood at his windows. He felt as though days had passed, possibly weeks. The only sense of time he possessed was the dark sky and the absence of a rising sun. Over the excruciating hours, the kaiju had not moved a step out of Prospect Park. He turned his eyes to the covered bowl. The mermaid had run out of steam hours ago and had fallen back to sleep. Ormy's head thundered like a storm. The anxiety, the fear, and the rush that had gone on forever finally took its toll. He stumbled backward, fell to his knees, and hit the carpet. Ormy woke up. He woke up in the same position he had fallen. Sunlight shined brightly from his windows and onto the bed and carpet. His head still pounded and the pain was still prominent. He got to his feet and glanced at the bowl. The sandstone had been removed, and the mermaid was sitting peacefully on her rocky seat. Painstakingly, Ormy attempted to piece his thoughts together. Memories, rational thought, and understanding blended together in an unfamiliar haze and became hard to decipher or distinguish. The demon, he realized. The TV was turned off, and the remote was resting on his bed. He sprinted for the window. No creature, no helicopters. Wild bewilderment made him dizzy again. He sat on the bed and stared towards the floor. Had it all been a dream? Had the beast been real? If he was hallucinating creatures, it would be reasonable that he had dreamed up the mermaid as well. But there she was, in her bowl, just as she had been for weeks. Hesitantly, he took the remote and activated the TV. Every channel he clicked through seemed typical. No news reports, no demon, no destruction. He found nothing but average daytime New York television. He clicked the TV off and dropped the remote to the floor. Ormy rubbed his face with his large hands and shook his head. He would just have to accept that what he experienced was a fabrication and carry on. If the broadcast had been real, it would still be found on the news the day after and even weeks after the event occurred. He took a long, calming breath and accepted the delusion. His stomach growled. Hunger nagged at his throat. Quickly, Ormy remembered the book. He had left it at the pet store. If he was hungry, he couldn't imagine how starved the poor thing in the bowl must have been. He jumped to his feet, snatched his wallet, retrieved his keys, and headed for the door. All at once, the terror returned. In one swift motion, the entire southeastern corner of his loft was stripped away. Glass, debris, bricks, and dust exploded from the disturbance as harsh sunlight poured into his condo. Ormy shielded his eyes from the light and gazed up at the monstrosity peering down at him from the outside. Red and blue scales, hulking limbs, and gnashing teeth. It roared with a terrible frenzy and reached into his loft with one enormous tentacle. The silent giant screamed helplessly as the kaiju grabbed him by his ankle and lifted him into the air and above the building. A flock of birds passed fearfully as he dangled from its horrible grip and over its hungry, gaping jaws. Terror and anguish crushed him like a vice as he was released, and sent howling with formidable horror down the beast's cavernous and damning throat. "Mr. Green?" a voice asked. All he could see was white. "Mr. Green, can you hear me?" she asked again. The room came into focus, and his surroundings became clear. Ormy sat in a chair facing a stern-looking woman at a desk, holding an open file. He was in some kind of office. Dark wood, potted plants, and the familiar hum of a pump motor met his senses. He spotted a small aquarium in the corner of the room. His eyes smiled as a school of neon tetras danced inside. Ormy was dressed in white scrubs, and an armed guard stood near the only door. She spoke again. "Mr. Green, can you tell me your first name?" His eyes shifted to her condescending glare. Like the sharp scent from a deceased flame, ascertainment engulfed him. For once, all became clear. Memories, rational thought, and understanding unfolded behind his eyes. The events leading up to this moment became perfectly aligned and distinct. Ormy's eyes narrowed to a perfunctory grimace. "Let's try something less complicated," she said. "Nod if you can hear me." He gave her nothing. His stare drove through her like a cold spike. The woman noticed his shift in presence. "There he is," she said quietly. She closed the file and laid it on the polished wood. "What were you planning to do with her, Mr. Green?" A marble statue would have twitched or blinked at the question. Ormy did not. "Kill her? You almost succeeded," she snapped. She pulled a photo from the file and presented it. He did not look at it. "Cynthia Williams, age 8, taken from a church function near Coney Island on June 11th. She examined his face, then laid the photo beside the file. "During the raid, police found her and you on the 6th story of an abandoned hotel on Lee Avenue. She had a broken femur and a fractured skull, starved, beaten, and covered in household chemicals. Her blood was found on a large brick beside the dog kennel you were keeping her in." Ormy didn't budge. "The TV in your room was turned to Channel 9, she stated. "Were you watching the investigation on the news?" The interrogator shifted in her seat and folded her fingers below her chin. Only the high-pitched sting of perfect silence drifted between them. She continued, "Your medical records state that you've been on risperidone since childhood with frequent, short-term lapses in the dosage over the past several years. I'd tell you that you are currently back on the medication, but I'm sure you are well aware of that now." She took a moment, then cleared her throat. On April 17th, you and your mother disappeared from your home at 1432 River. Her vehicle was found parked at your hotel. An expression of frustrated inquiry grazed her lips. "Mr. Green, where's your mother?" she asked. Ormy looked away for just a second. He dwelled on his brother and the letters they had shared. His heart grinned with an inauspicious delight. That was evidence neither her nor the police would ever find. The woman sat back in her leather chair and waved her fingers dismissively. "I guess that's enough for today," she sighed. Her eyes focused sharply on his. "I want you to think long and hard about what we talked about today. We will talk again very soon." She signaled for the guard. He softly approached and helped Ormy from his seat. They walked slowly towards the door. "Mr. Green?" she said again. He and the guard turned. "Can you at least say your first name for me?" she asked. A pinch of desperation shone in her eye. Ormy coldly looked away and continued for the door. He and his armed escort departed from the office. In a comfortable cell, Ormy laid on a twin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Day came to a darkening close, and night fell. The dim glow of a hall light loomed in his enclosure as he gave one last listen for guards or patrols. Only silence. Slowly, Ormy sat up and lifted his sore foot, resting it on his knee. With a worn thumbnail, he scratched the flesh away from his callous heel. Chunks of white skin and droplets of blood fell to the tile floor as he pulled a small plastic bag out of his foot. He opened the bag and removed a roll of paper, a golf pencil, and his mother's weathered credit card. Ormy unrolled the paper and read the last several messages addressed to Hayden. He turned a page over and sharpened the pencil against the painted brick beside the bed. He drafted a letter back. "Ormy, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm sorry it took me so long to respond. I heard about your mermaid, and I'm so sorry she was taken from you. I'm sure you will find another very soon. I'll make sure of it. I have enclosed an expenses card to help get you on your feet and to replace your metal detector. I will find you a car as soon as I can, but stay clear of Brighton Beach. I hear that Rockaway Beach is beautiful this time of year. I'm proud of you for standing up to Mom. She got what she deserved. If you'd like to visit her, she is buried in Highland Park near the old fountain, beside a tree marked with a seahorse-shaped stone. As matters progress, I will keep you posted. Love, Hayden." He rolled up the letter and placed it into the bag, along with the pencil and card. Clenching his teeth and wincing in pain, he pushed the bag back into his foot and cleaned up the blood and flesh. Abruptly, a door down the hall opened as a patient was brought in. She cried and screamed as she was led to a cell and sealed inside. Her escort's footsteps faded off, and the door was slammed closed. The inmate continued to cry, beg and weep into the long hours of the night. The silent giant smiled. He laid in his bed, pulled the thin blanket over his hulking shoulder, and rested his head upon the soft pillow. Singing always helped him get to sleep. This was a reading of Sea Monster, Imprisoned by Madness, by Mark Stephen Nordlund. Copyright 2025. Mark Stephen Nordlund. All rights reserved. A Boohouse Books book. BoohouseBooks.com.